Hey, Ben Shapiro, after this, I better never hear you say another word about black people and gun violence. You spent your entire career lying. For this video, I'm using the exact same source for information that Ben is using, which is CDC. I'm also using statistics from the FBI Uniform Crime Reports. I'd say about 80% of what you're going to get in this video is from CDC, which is the same source that Ben is using.
Fine, okay, now let's get to the real gun violence statistic. All
right, folks, you heard him. Let's get to the real gun violence statistics.
So what we've been hearing is gun violence is constantly on the increase. People are being murdered on a scale that boggles the imagination. School shootings are increasing, and your child is, if not likely going to die, has a high likelihood of being shot at a school. This is not true. Okay, gun deaths in the United States have been radically declining since 1993.
Ben Shapiro says that gun deaths in the United States have been rapidly declining since 1993. Not only is this a lie, but Ben Shapiro irrefutably knows that it is a lie, and I'll show you why in a second. Now, to be clear, gun crimes absolutely did go down rapidly since 1993. But Ben Shapiro didn't say gun crimes, did he? No, he said gun deaths.
Gun deaths in the United States have been radically declining since 1993.
You ready? Pay close attention to this.
Gun deaths in the United States have been radically declining since 1993. According to the Centers for Disease Control, there were 7 gun-related homicides for every 100,000 Americans in 1993. By 2013, that number had been sliced in half to 3.6 homicides per 100,000 population. During that same period, the number of privately owned firearms in the United States doubled from 185 million to 357 million privately owned firearms in the United States. So the number of arms in the United States was going like this, and the amount of gun crime in the United States was going like that.
Okay, so the quote he just made from CDC about homicides is absolutely true. And what he said about gun ownership going way up while gun crime is going way down, that's true as well. He said he's here to give you the facts about gun violence, and he started off by lying to you. Homicide did decline, and crime did decline, but gun deaths absolutely did not. Ben knows that gun deaths did not decline, and he is about to keep lying about it.
And yet everybody in the media seems to assume that more guns means more crime. You're going to have to explain then why more guns does not mean more crime. Okay, where do all of these... Also, quick note, they say there are 33,000 gun-related deaths in the United States. They neglect to mention that 2/3 of these are suicide. About 8,000, 9,000 gun-related homicides in the United States. The vast majority of gun-related deaths are people who are killing themselves.
Did you hear that? He just debunked himself.
Gun deaths in the United States have been radically declining since 1993. The vast majority of gun-related deaths are people who are killing themselves.
Much of the decline in gun-related homicide has been offset by the rapid increase in gun-related suicides. Ben Shapiro is well aware of this, and he is also well aware of the fact that he just lied in front of an audience. How do I know? We're using the same source, the CDC report.
About 8,000, 9,000 gun-related homicides in the United States. The vast majority of gun-related deaths are people who are killing themselves.
It is fair speculation to say the reason he has purposely ignored suicides in his speech is to push forward the right-wing narrative of gun violence, which includes saying that blacks commit disproportionate gun violence.
Okay, Richard Florida writes, the share of the population that is black is positively related to both the overall rate of gun death and even more so with gun-related homicides. Okay, Richard Florida writes, the share of the population that is black is positively related to both the overall rate of gun death and even more so with gun-related homicides.
I've seen Ben say in another video, the biggest determining factor of gun violence in the state was how many black people were in a state.
And you're going to look at factors that are statistically relevant. The number of black people in a state are more statistically relevant than the number of guns in a state. This is not a racist point. Okay, people are not murdering other people because they are black. That's obviously a stupid notion. About 8,000, 9,000 gun-related homicides in the United States. The vast majority of gun-related deaths are people who are killing themselves.
Yet white males commit over 2/3 of all the gun deaths in the United States when you include suicide-related, despite being less than 33% of the population. So what does disproportionate mean?
The vast majority of gun-related deaths are people who are killing themselves.
So you tell me what disproportionate gun violence means.
Also, quick note, they say there are 33,000 gun-related deaths in the United States. They neglect to mention that 2/3 of these are suicide. The single strongest predictor of rates of gun death by a wide margin is actually race, unfortunately. The single strongest predictor of rates of gun death by a wide margin is actually race, unfortunately. Also, quick note, they say there are 33,000 gun-related deaths in the United States. They neglect to mention that 2/3 of these are suicide.
Either Ben Shapiro doesn't know how to read, or he is lying about gun violence and race. And judging from the hundreds of times that I think I've heard Ben say that black people commit disproportionate gun violence, I can say he can read just fine, unless the words on the page are white male or suicide or honesty. This dude is disgusting because his lies are impacting two completely different groups of people. Matter of fact, many different groups of people, but two groups of people in particular who need help. There's no such thing as proportionate murder. You need to find better wording for what it is you're trying to say.
Now, let it be noted, I am not suggesting that black people are inherently more likely to kill each other because that's stupid and racist. What I am suggesting is that culture has a high likelihood of causing homicide.
Oh God, the culture argument, the dumbest shit of all time. To use a word as broad and general as culture to define gun deaths among black people is just insane. It's a brand new level of stupid. Okay, let's look at it this way. So let's say that Korean people like gray balloons, right? And that's a stereotype. You hear it on the news, on the web. A bunch of political commentators are obsessed with talking about it. Laws and legislation and policy can even happen about it. You might see a Korean and you start thinking, does that Korean person like gray balloons? I think that Korean person might like gray balloons. What percentage of Koreans would have to like gray balloons in order for you to make it a stereotype about the whole group of Koreans? Is it 10%, 20%, 65%, 5%? What if it was less than 1/10 of 1%? In 2016, 4,900 black people were arrested and charged for about 6,000 murders. That means 99.9% of black people never committed a homicide. Matter of 99.999, you get the point. You get the point. So to quote Joe Rogan, if I gave you a sandwich that was 99.9% shit and the rest of it was ham, would you call that a ham sandwich? No, I didn't think so.
The single strongest predictor of rates of gun death by a wide margin is actually race, unfortunately. Richard Florida writes, the share of the population that is black is positively related to both the overall rate of gun death and even more so with gun-related homicides. Now, let it be noted, I am not suggesting that black people are inherently more likely to kill each other because that's stupid and racist.
70% of all suicides, 51% of white male suicides happen by handgun. So there are more handgun deaths by suicides by white males than there are homicide arrests for all races combined, including white homicides. Ben knows all of this, and he continues to grossly misrepresent this information by saying race is the determining factor in gun violence because of black people. We've seen him make quotes similar to this in the past by himself, but in this particular speech, he passes it off by quoting someone else.
Richard Florida writes, the share of the population that is black is positively related to both the overall rate of gun death and even more so with gun-related homicides. Now, let it be noted, I am not suggesting that black people are inherently more likely to kill each other because that's stupid and racist. What I am suggesting is that culture has a high likelihood of causing homicide.
So to use a term like culture, a general term to describe tens of millions of people, 43 million people in fact, apparently Ben is not too good with reading or math. I thought you said Ben Shapiro was smart. This is your smart guy, right? Do you think he's smart enough to know that he's lying, or is he actually stupid? And as far as knowing black culture, does Ben Shapiro have a sister that can braid my hair? Has he ever tried out for the step team? Can 17-year-old Ben Shapiro holler at a 17-year-old Beyonce and get a phone number? Does Ben Shapiro know what a hot comb smells like? I'm curious to know how this motherfucker became an expert on black culture all of a sudden. Did this nigga buy some Yeezys or something? Kanye is in the sunken place, homie. Them sneakers did not give you a key to blackness. This is propaganda designed to demonize black people. That's the whole point of the regurgitated lie about black people and gun violence. They form gun laws using that lie. They form narratives using that lie. They over-police young black men using that lie. And I'm fucking sick of hearing that lie. When Ben talks about the gender pay gap, there are so many nuances, and he will tell you about the wage gap doesn't account for this factor and that factor, and all of these little things over here matter too. Yet when it comes to gun violence, Black people are the problem because black people commit half of all the murders. Lying sack of shit doesn't tell you any of the information correctly. He doesn't tell you that any of those murders are justifiable homicides. A home invasion where you kill a criminal who broke into your home, for example, is a justifiable homicide. Not only that, but the crime reports reflect the amount of people charged or arrested for murder. You can be an accomplice and get arrested for murder. You cannot pull a trigger at all and get arrested for murder. If you are talking about all murders committed, then black people represent 35% of murders because all murder cases don't result in arrest. All murder cases are not solved. Some of them are not solved in that same year. Some of them are not solved in that same decade. He doesn't tell you that because saying 40,000 people out of 43 million people got arrested for the act of murder, or saying 35% of all homicide arrests doesn't sound as threatening as black people commit half of all murders. It's a quick, simple, easy lie to remember, and you keep that in your mind when you see a black person so that you feel threatened by that black person. If you didn't feel that threat about black people, it would be a lot harder for you to try to justify the things you see happening to black people on the news and in courtrooms. Trayvon Martin got shot, black people commit half of all murders. Black man blocked from entering his own apartment building, black people commit half of all murders. So what? Black child got shot for playing with a BB gun, black people commit half of all murders. So what? You want a white ethno state, black people commit half of all murders. So what? This lie has been used to try to justify all kind of bullshit. And again, Ben Shapiro helping this lie get circulated over and over. So now you guys know how to defeat that lie, and I'm just getting started. Trust me, I could really blow your mind. I know this data inside and out, but I'll save it for Ben if he ever decides to try to debate me. But he won't because he is a liar, and he knows it, and now you know it too.
There are 33,000 gun-related deaths in the United States. They neglect to mention that 2/3 of these are suicide. About 8,000, 9,000 gun-related homicides in the United States. The vast majority of gun-related deaths are people who are killing themselves. And it is very easy to substitute another method for killing yourself.
Think about it. If black men were responsible for that many gun deaths by suicide, do you think Ben would have left that out of his speech? When you give long speeches, people don't remember everything you say word for word. They remember how you make them feel.
And culture differs. Okay, you can look in poor white communities. There's a higher rate of homicide there as well. Cultural issues and poverty in major American cities factor into gun death. Guns are not the chief reason for gun death. In other words, you need bad people picking up guns in order for those guns to fire themselves.
Okay, that was a self-own. He just dunked on himself. Did you hear that? You need bad people to pick up guns and fire them. Minutes earlier, he said 2/3 of gun deaths are suicides. So is Ben Shapiro logic calling suicidal people who need help bad people? Because it sure sounded like it to me, unless he wants to clarify.
Where do gun-involved deaths take place? So the idea from the left is that states that have lax gun laws have higher rates of gun crime. This is not true. Gun-involved deaths take place in mostly America's major cities. So all those hicks from the sticks, you know, the people who actually own all the guns, those aren't the people who are killing each other.
I guess that Ben is correct when he says that people in rural areas are not really killing each other, because technically they are killing themselves more so than each other.
There are 33,000 gun-related deaths in the United States. They neglect to mention that 2/3 of these are suicide. About 8,000, 9,000 gun-related homicides in the United States. The vast majority of gun-related deaths are people who are killing themselves. And it is very easy to substitute another method for killing yourself.
It's facts before text, right? What he just said is objectively stupid. He says it's easy to substitute another method for killing yourself instead of using a gun. Turns out that's true for homicides too, which is something you should remember if you ever get into a gun debate and somebody brings up the murder rate. The murder rate doesn't just factor in guns. It includes knives, blunt objects like hammers or clubs, fire, poison, explosives, strangulation, asphyxiation, miscellaneous weapons, or the weapon can also be unknown. They may happen at different rates, but to say that you can easily substitute a weapon for suicide like that isn't true for homicide, that's kind of dumb.
Okay, this is all happening in cities, in major American cities. Virtually all of these major American cities are governed by one party, and I will let you guess which party that is.
If you look at the top 15 states by gun ownership, it's nearly identical to the gun deaths by state when you look at gun-related suicides. According to the CDC, the same place Ben got his facts from, People in rural areas are far more likely to die by suicide. Remember earlier when Ben said that 2/3 of gun deaths are by suicide, right? I got my info from the exact same site as him, but here again we see another fact that's purposely left out of his speech. Gee, I wonder why.
Almost 60% of all American firearm homicides occur in the 62 cities of the country's largest metros. In order of gun homicide, gun-related death: New Orleans, Detroit, Las Vegas, Miami, Baltimore, St. Louis, Richmond, Memphis, Cleveland, and Philadelphia. That is 9 Democrat mayors and 1 Republican mayor, the only Republican being in Miami.
Oh, okay, I see why now. It's all a game of partisanship. This is not about the truth or the facts, it's about politics. Thanks, Ben. Let's continue.
New Orleans, Detroit, Las Vegas, Miami, Baltimore, St. Louis, Richmond, Memphis, Cleveland, and Philadelphia. That is 9 Democrat mayors and 1 Republican mayor, the only Republican being in Miami.
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Jacksonville, Florida, Denver, Colorado, Miami, Florida, Mesa, Arizona, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Sacramento, California, Tucson, Arizona, Colorado Springs, Colorado, Las Vegas, Nevada. Those are the top cities for all gun deaths, not just related gun homicide. It paints a more substantial picture to look at the ownership of guns by state versus the gun deaths by state. Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Idaho, Oregon, Maryland, New Jersey, New York. And so that by majority is Republican-run areas when you look at all gun violence related deaths and not just homicide.
Get to the real gun violence statistics. So what we've been hearing is gun violence is constantly on the increase. People are being murdered on a scale that boggles the imagination. School shootings are increasing, and your child is, if not likely going to die, has a high likelihood of being shot at a school. This is not true. Okay, gun deaths in the United States have been radically declining since 1993. According to the Centers for Disease Control, there were 7 gun-related homicides for every 100,000 Americans in 1993. By 2013, that number had been sliced in half to 3.6 homicides per 100,000 population. During that same period, the number of privately owned firearms in the United States doubled from 185 million to 357 million privately owned firearms in the United States. So the number of arms in the United States was going like this, and the amount of gun crime in the United States was going like that. And yet everybody in the media seems to assume that more guns means more crime. You're going to have to explain then why more guns does not mean more crime.
Gun-related homicides have been falling for the last 30 years. In that same 30-year period, suicide has risen to be the 10th leading cause according to CDC. As it turns out, you can't be arrested and charged with a crime for committing suicide, so the crime rate really wouldn't be affected. It is literally defined by the CDC as gun violence. It is defined both in the dictionary and under legal terms as self-murder. Self-murder is a compound, not the same as homicide or non-negligent manslaughter or even murder. It is self-murder. I'm saying this to be completely honest and straightforward. It's not slander, and I'm not demonizing anybody who commits suicide. These are actual facts. The reason it is called self-murder and recognized as gun violence is because it is intentional self-harm. The deciding factors being the use of a firearm with the intention of ending a life. Gun violence is gun violence, and gun death is gun death. Ben Shapiro lies and says gun deaths have been rapidly declining while gun ownership has been increasing. He is objectively lying his ass off, and he knows it. Again, my facts come from the exact same place his facts come from. The difference is I'm telling you the whole truth, and Ben is keeping the whole truth from you because he is a propagandist. Now, we all have seen Ben say that black people commit half of all murders. I have several videos up right now debunking that lie.